We just won this Hellcat Redeye at the salvage auction for pennies on the dollar, though given the circumstances, I do suppose that's fair. Believe it or not, buying junk cars like this is a hack we've used time and time again to build some of our craziest cars for way less money than you might think. Take, for example, this Redeye engine with the big 2.7 liter supercharger sitting on the top of it. You could buy one straight from Dodge for 23 grand. You could hit up eBay and buy one for about $19,000, or you could buy this entire Hellcat Redeye for that same 19 grand. Don't get me wrong, we're still taking a huge risk here. After all, this was an incredibly hard wreck, and if we find that the engine got damaged, we could lose a lot of money real fast. But if it's just the body that got destroyed, if all the important parts survived, we could end up with this $20-some thousand engine for a couple grand, maybe even free. The idea here is we should be able to sell off all the extra parts and recoup as much of the $19,100 we paid for this as possible, thus giving us a Redeye engine for the cheap. In theory, it sounds super simple, but it gets slightly less simple when you realize how freaking bad this thing got smoked.
This is really bad.
It's rough. It's really rough. This is one of the only banana-shaped Hellcats I've seen come through the shop, and yeah, there should essentially be car where you are. If I had to take a guess as to how this happened, I'd probably say it spun sideways into a pole right about there, and there's really not much on this driver's side that didn't get just completely smashed in. There's the fact that the roof is all buckled up and then, I assume, cut by the fire department to try to free up the door after the accident. And then there's the inside, which, if I'm being honest, I feel kind of weird even getting into. Wow. This is my view from the driver's seat, and for as bad as it looks, it somehow still doesn't do it justice. The steering wheel's pushed over so far that it's where the radio should be from the factory. The gauge cluster, that's all crunched up the entire side of the dashboard. It's smoked, and then you have the pedals. There is basically no room to operate them. They're all bent inwards. The center console, this is pushed over a good 6 inches. This is easily the worst driver's compartment I've been in. But for as bad as this thing might look at first, for our purposes, it's really the perfect car. I know it probably seems like we just went to Copart and said, give me your worst Redeye stat, but that's not quite how it went. This whole scheme only works if you can find a car that's wrecked badly enough where no one's gonna wanna rebuild it, but not wrecked in a way that it's gonna damage the engine that we're trying to get out of it. Fixable Redeyes, they're all 30 grand plus, so they're out. Now, there are a ton of Hellcats that have got smoked in the front end, available for cheap on the auction sites, but that usually destroys the engine too, so that doesn't do us much good. So cars like this that have got hit hard in the sides, maybe even a heavy rear end wreck, they really are the perfect ones. Now, before we start ripping old girl apart, we're gonna try to get some type of power to the body, mainly so we can get a mileage off the gauge cluster, but also because I kind of just want to see what happens. Unfortunately, I guess the tow yard, maybe the fire department, cut the battery cable going into the chassis, so right now wouldn't have any power. It's not the most uncommon thing in the world to do it to prevent any kind of fire in case there's some frayed wires, something shorting out. We are going to strip this back and I guess try to clamp it to the battery terminal. The vehicle history report on this thing says it has like 1,500 miles on it, but it was a few years ago, so I don't necessarily buy it. Hopefully we can get an actual mileage here. Not yet. You ready?
No.
You really backed up.
Yeah.
You really backed up.
Yeah. Okay.
Did anything happen?
Nothing.
Okay. We did get a key with this thing. That I didn't expect that.
What is that?
I guess it's an aftermarket alarm. Quite annoying if I might say so. Let's see. Oh, we got a gauge cluster. We should have mileage. Let's just, break the dashboard out of the way so we can see the gauge cluster. Oh, whoa, hold on. Okay, everything's happening. Number one, 20,400 miles. That's awesome. Number two, it just cranked. Things are freaking out in here. As you would expect, every single light is on the dashboard, but I guess the brake pedal switch is engaged. it's acting like the brake is pushed down. So when I push the start button, this thing cranked, which brings up a good point, Fernando.
Yeah.
There's no reason this shouldn't start. If it just cranked, it should start. If it was gonna leak fuel, it already leaked fuel.
I don't see nothing.
No, I don't see anything.
Or smell nothing.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was about to say. Screw it. Well, I guess I don't have to press the brake. We've already established that. Whoa! Even when they're hit like this on the side, 9 times out of 10, they're not going to start. There should, theoretically at least, be so much wiring damage in here that something would prevent it from starting. This one time, we got very lucky. This, quite ironically, might be one of the quietest Redeye engines I've ever heard. There's no tapping, no weird knocking. It just sounds good. Though, I suppose with our newfound knowledge of it only having 20,000 miles, that kind of checks out. Fire it up.
Got a problem here.
You don't know how to use a gas pedal. That's the problem, right? So we didn't technically get away with no wiring damage. There's, I guess, something in between the throttle pedal and the ECU that's not letting the throttle body see that you're pushing the throttle. Not only do we have no throttle, but the shifter, we can't get that out of park. That might be because the physical assembly's all bound up with the console being pushed over. There's a lot wrong here, but as far as I'm concerned, there's even more right. It's so funny. Everything in here still works. The radio, okay, maybe not the HVAC, but the gauge cluster. Yep, we got turn signal still. It's weird to see all this stuff still lighting up and functioning, just not at all being in the right place, though. I do suppose for our purposes, we've kind of seen enough. I honestly just can't help myself on this one. We gotta see if the stars light up, right? Oh! I'm not gonna lie. It's not the worst thing in the world. From down here, it kind of looks cool, though I can't believe I'm saying that.
I knew it that you want to put this in the 170.
We're not gonna do that. You know that saying about not seeing how the sausage is made? If you didn't see what's behind the headliner, it's not that bad. Wouldn't do it myself. 7 out of 10. And this feels almost identical to owning a Rolls Royce. Right? Basically the same thing, right? Yeah, sure, we have a cut-off Hellcat roof with the headliner on a forklift, but basically indistinguishable.
Yeah.
There's something cool about
No,
this,
this
right?
definitely sucks. Yeah, it sucks. Can you explain this?
Well, we got a fine Italian wine to go with our American muscle. Yeah, it makes sense. So prior to pulling this stuff apart, I assumed that 99.9% of the interior was just going to be straight trash. And for the most part, we're right. But the more we get into it, the more we find a few really expensive parts that somehow survived, I think. The impressive part here is not only did these parts like the radio screen and the gauge cluster actually power up, but somehow they didn't get shattered. Even the mounts survived. The dashboard literally broke off in the screen, but the screen itself, minty fresh and worth about 500 bucks. And I could almost buy it with the radio screen. The mount's on it's metal, it's further away from the damage, but the gauge cluster, I can't quite comprehend how this just didn't shatter. How was this in one piece? This is the bucket inside the dashboard that holds the gauge cluster, and that thing's completely ripped apart. I don't understand it, but I'm surely not going to complain about it.
We can definitely sell these things. They're not that bad. I almost got myself.
Some dude just flew past you on an electric dirt bike. I had 100% written these rear seats off. I just assumed they were going to be unusable in some way. I mean, they're in pretty rough shape as far as the covers go, but so many people are doing resto mods and so many people are doing custom color seats in Hellcats too that I'm positive we're going to be able to get some money out of them. As for the passenger seat, well, we'll make this into some kind of an office chair, and then there's the driver's seat, which is just staying with the car. One thing we definitely can't forget is this little passenger Redeye logo dash vent. Don't know why, but they're worth like 150 bucks. Now this isn't necessarily worth any money, but we are gonna do ourselves a favor and grab the RF hub, the body control module, the security module as well. So as of right now, we're still, how do I put this? We are blanking on the Demon 170. We ain't having a great time trying to get it programmed, so just in case we need to use a Redeye setup in it, we know it works, we have a key for it, why not? Rather safe than sorry. The final piece of the interior has a lot of glass. Isn't necessarily part of the interior at all, but we do have to get to it in here, so we're gonna count it, and that is the fuel pump. Nailed it. When these cars get hit on the side like this, they do often break this fuel pump hanger. These Redeyes have the same exact dual fuel pump that the Demons do, so not only are they worth a ton of money, we actually use them in a lot of projects here too. Again, if this housing isn't cracked. A lot of times, not only will this housing break, where these metal rods go into the housing, that'll crack. This time, it truly looks like we got a good fuel pump unit. One just pro fuel pump tip here. If you do want to try to swap a dual fuel pump setup like this into a car that wasn't supposed to come with, like a regular Hellcat, maybe even a Scat Pack, though I haven't done that myself, you also need this unit, which is currently just pouring fuel back into the car. And now that we got our interior stripped clean, at least of anything useful, we can see exactly how much money we were able to make back. We got ourselves about 500 bucks in this driver steering wheel airbag, though I still don't quite understand how it's in one piece. We got 100 bucks for our climate control and SRT buttons. Call it $100 for our center console trim and our red carbon fiber shifter handle. We got 300 bucks in the gauge cluster, that we probably will have to replace this cover with one out of a V6 car or something if we want to get $300 out of it. We got, call it 500 bucks for our radio screen. We got 150 bucks for that Redeye vent panel, $500 for the fuel pump setup, and then we have the miscellaneous bin. We'll call this 100 bucks. We got floor mats, a headrest off the driver's seat, the center console. We got the rear seats, which are actually quite expensive. We'll call those 300. Grand total for our interior and fuel pump, 2,550 bucks.
Wait, dude.
In the grand scheme of things, when we have to make up almost $19,000, it's really not that much. But considering what I thought we were gonna get out of this interior, which is maybe $1,000, home run. Under normal circumstances, we'd be able to pull our front bumper off, no problem, but as you probably imagine on this car, there are lights everywhere. Starting with, of course, this LED Hellcat logo in the front grille, which actually might look kind of cool, but on the wiring side of things, it's snaked up here through the front core support. Looks like it's been cut there already once. And then it goes into this massive bundle of wires that's tucked up here by the fuse box, which I presume, based on the fact that we see all this sealant on the headlights now, there's also an LED kit inside the headlights.
We have to turn it on.
I mean, that was never a question. You know we're gonna do that. I mean, we're not gonna turn on the star headliner, then not do all this, right?
Exactly.
The problem is trying to figure out what we have to do to turn it on. This is a freaking mess. We're just gonna start cutting zip ties and hope for the best. So we have two LED boxes here. There's a third LED box, which I can't quite get out yet. There is a resistor pack, I don't know, a fourth LED box or some type of controller. I don't know much about adding LED lights to cars, but this seems like a lot for a front grille badge. Go back to the old Milwaukee battery here. I got a spark, something happened.
Oh, it's on. Look at that.
Now, I assume that can do a lot more, probably different colors, different designs, different patterns.
Would you put that thing in one of your cars?
I'd put it on one of your cars. Okay, I'll do it on the 350Z.
No. Oh.
All it took was an app. You don't need a remote, you just need an app.
Look, you can adjust a lot. So I pressed yellow, and it's purple, blue, green. Green is red.
You know, considering some of the stuff we build here, you'd think that a LED grill badge wouldn't entertain us for 10 minutes. We did look it up. This thing costs $280, but I don't think we're going to sell it. We got a orange 350Z. We had to bring Tim in for this one. I mean, if there's a guy who appreciates a good wiring job, it's Tim, you know?
Ooh, there we go.
Make it dance or something. You know?
I don't know, that kind of matches your other car.
Yeah, look at that.
This will not happen.
Wow,
Okay? This will
come
not
on.
happen.
It's on the microphone.
Wait, it is. Holy
Oh, dude, you gotta do it. You have to do
Holy
it.
crap. Listen to me and my headlights. I am not putting these in my Demon 170.
All right.
Okay? What? Definitely screwed up by not doing that when this thing had power. One of the things on these cars that's way more expensive than you might imagine is a center brake light. Of course, there's more random stuff tapped into it, but that's besides the point. This, even with the little scratches on the center, it's $450. And I know they weren't on the car in the beginning of the video, but we do have the side taillights too. They're like another $200 a piece. We just had to pull these out a little early to try to snatch apart off the rear wiring harness for the Demon 170. Fortunately, it was not successful. Then we have the trunk itself, which unfortunately isn't really worth that much money, being that it's the same as all the V6 cars. In fact, the spoiler's probably the most expensive part about it. Our rear bumper, it is, well, it's seen better days. This whole lower diffuser is all jacked up. It's got heavy gouges all throughout it. All these tabs up top are broken. Then, probably most importantly, over here it is held on with primarily zip ties to make up for all the broken tabs. But it's not all bad news, because these rear flares on the side, they're where 90% of the money is anyway. These are the little wide body add-ons that are supposed to match up with the flare that should be on the quarter panel. And other than a few little scratches there, and the fact that at some point somebody connected them to the rear quarter panel with wood screws, they look like they're in decent shape. I think the other one was some kind of a wood screw. This one is like a masonry screw, maybe? I don't know. We got the big boy flare, actual fender flare. It's twice the size, twice the price. It's about 400 bucks, and this one doesn't have any freaking wood screws in it. Then lastly, we have the little baby fender flares, the ones that get literally stapled to the side skirt. These don't have a ton of value. They're still a popular upgrade if you're converting your car to wide body. You need these. That is, however, unfortunately about it as far as the body goes. Not that we really expected to get that much given how jacked up this thing was. But as far as value, we have the front bumper, which is probably the most expensive piece of all. If it was in perfect shape, if it didn't have the clips in the grill all broken up, it'd probably be a $1,500 bumper. We'll call it $1,000. We've got $850 total in taillights, and ironically also $850 total in fender flares. And then we have all the miscellaneous stuff, the little plastics that go on top of the bumper, the radiator shroud, and we have the OEM Mopar hood pin kit, or at least part of it. The straps themselves broke completely. We'll call all that stuff 200 bucks for good measure. Then there's the headlights. A good clean set of HID headlights for these cars are $1,000 all day long. But while these do, well, it's probably going to make them less valuable. The fact that they've been opened up, the fact that there's a broken tab on one of them, they're going to be really, really cool to the right person, but they're ultimately just not going to be worth the same amount of money given that they're kind of ratty. We'll call these $750. Then we got the trunk and this SRT spoiler alone that kind of comes down around the bumper. That's about $500 alone if you buy it new. Trust me, I just had to buy one for the Demon 170, but the fact that this one's scratched up along with the trunk being scratched up, we'll call it 500 bucks for the whole deal. Altogether, out of the body, we've got $4,150. Again, it's not really setting the world on fire. We haven't recouped that much yet, that's about to change. So we got ourselves kind of a good news, bad news situation here. On one hand, we have a fantastic set of Brembo brakes. None of them got damaged in the wreck. When you pair them with the brake rotors and the hubs to let you use these 6-piston front brakes, it's $2 grand all day. But on the other hand, pretty much from the jump, we knew something was, we'll say, off with the wheels. They don't look like any of the factory Hellcat wide body wheels, and it turns out they're not. They're for a narrow body Hellcat, which is why they had these massive wheel spacers all the way around. I was hopeful at the very least that while they weren't a factory set of wheels for the wide body car, that they would be an OEM set for a narrow body so they'd have some value, but judging by that right there, I'm gonna guess that's not the case. If these were the right wheels, and of course they were all in good shape, which these are not, pretty much every single tire is slit, gouged, cut in some way, shape, or form, we'd be looking at another $2 grand. These guys, $500 to $700, maybe, assuming they're all straight. But one quick note, I didn't notice this when they were on the car. I just walked past and noticed now. These brake calipers, they're not painted, they're wrapped. Of course, now that they're off the car, it's really easy to pick them apart. You can see every little crease and line, and it seems like something you'd want to make fun of, but given that you didn't notice when they were on the car, they actually look pretty good. Can't hate on it.
I would give you like a solid 8 out of 10.
This really is becoming the story of the whole car at this point. With how hard it was hit, there's just so much that was damaged, you really can't tell what's straight and what's not when it comes to things like, say, control arms. I mean, after all, every wheel is tweaked at least a little bit, but it's not all bad. Because these Hellcats are so big and chunky, there's a lot of parts on the inside of the suspension that don't really get damaged even in wrecks like this. Number one being the struts. These things are all over eBay for $1,000 for a full set, but even though these are kind of low mileage in the 20s, they don't look that great, so I think we'll be fair and keep it realistic. We'll call it $750. The reason these things are so desirable and therefore expensive is, say you have a Hellcat with 90,000 miles on it. All your shocks are going bad. These magnetic shocks are so expensive from Dodge that it makes sense to just buy a low mile takeoff set for a quarter of the price. Another part on the suspension that almost always survives are the axles. There we go. Just by these cars' very nature of being fat, heavy, and having a ton of power, these axles break all the time. Trust me, I know. And because of that, it seems like everybody and their mother needs a set of these. And when you get a good set like this, nice, easy, quick $600. And then there's the steering rack, which might not seem like something that would hold up particularly well in a wreck like this, and for the most part, they don't. But 99 times out of 100, they bend right here on the inner tie rod, just like this one did, and that is a very simple, cheap, and easy part to replace. You pop this boot off, hit a nut, you can replace it for under $100. All that really matters on these Hellcats that came with electric power steering is the main center portion of the steering rack. Steering racks are so incredibly expensive straight from Dodge that there's a strong secondhand market for it. So bent tie rods or not, people will happily buy these secondhand and try to save a few bucks, being that they're so expensive from Dodge. We'll be able to pull, I don't know, a good $500 from this, even with the bent tie rod. Can't really be too mad about the fact that we're able to get a few $1,000s out of the suspension on a car that looked like this. Normally, occasionally rather, you don't get anything from the suspension.
Put it this way, we actually recover some money from the wheels.
And I guess that's a good way to look at it. China wheels, good suspension parts. In addition to those main parts, got a few other odds and ends like the front fender liners, which are unexplainably expensive, the rear hubs, the power steering harness, brake lines. With our big parts and our miscellaneous parts, we'll call it $2 grand. Now comes the fun part of this whole deal. Also the scary part. You just never truly know what's going to happen when a car takes this amount of force. We've had plenty of times where the engine mount pedestals will get broken clean off the engine block. We've had the tail shaft on the transmission. That'll separate itself completely from the rest of the transmission. At least on this one though, there's no major red flags yet. You can see that the rubber transmission mount there is probably sheared, or at the very least is broken in some way, shape, or form. The whole transmission is over slightly that way. You can tell because the transmission oil pan, I guess, came in contact with this cross member and it's bent up right there. But other than that, at least at first glance, it looks like we're on track to have a solid drivetrain. We definitely, however, cannot say the same thing about the chassis, though of course this is all to be expected. The rockers kinked in heavy. You can see where they welded the floor together. That's all separated. This is that frame rail, and way back here past the subframe, that's kinked up. That is truly impressive. Honestly, it looks like it took it in the rear pretty well. It escaped without any real hard damage. This exhaust tip, that's all bent up. Actually, the whole exhaust pipe, that's crushed in. It does look like our active exhaust flaps, they survived, and these are worth like $250 alone. One thing of note, I do believe this is the first time in the history of me buying Hellcats that we bought one, had it show up at the shop with the factory resonators on them. I swear to you, it seems like people buy these things new off the lot and head straight to the cheapest muffler shop they can find. They hack these guys clean off, weld on a cheap piece of mild steel for like 50 bucks and make Hellcat noises. That was, what's the word I'm looking for? Exhausting. Anyway, the exhaust worked out significantly better than I originally anticipated. It turns out only the tip was damaged on this one muffler. The actual mufflers themselves are fine, so that's 150 bucks right there. These active exhaust flaps, they're super popular to integrate into custom exhaust builds. Those are $250, and it turns out these resonators that people constantly hack off and throw away, I found a couple sets on eBay that have sold for $150, so this is bonus money I really didn't expect. And then, of course, there's catalytic converters. I forgot we can't say catalytic converter too loud around here. It'll remind Tim of his old job.
Police say they caught a brazen suspect trying to cut a catalytic converter off a business van.
Assuming these guys don't go missing before we scrap them, these are worth a good 300 bucks alone. So exhaust, $850. We could grab another $400 out of the headers, but for now we're gonna leave those with the engine, so it's not really fair to count that. Check it out, Hellcats.
Oh my. Oh,
Clean.
that was a clean one. Look at that oil. That looks dirty.
A little dark, but it's a Hellcat differential. You know what they've been doing to it. Rightfully so. Now for the important one. And of course, as you guys probably all know, we don't have a great history here. Yep, there we go.
Oh my.
3, 2, oh yeah. It is funny because at this point in my life, any oil that I see that's not clear or not milky, oh yeah, it's a win. Doesn't matter how dark it is, at least it's oil. Should put that on a t-shirt.
At least it's oil.
At least it's oil. Then one thing I constantly forget about on these is they also put a drain plug on the oil cooler so you can get every last drop out of it when you're doing your oil change. Looks good to me. Now that we got ourselves properly drained, we can get on with stripping our front end. And if everything goes right here, just what's in this front grill area is gonna net us like $3 grand. But again, it's only if it all survived. First up is our radiator assembly, and this also happens to be the one I'm most concerned about, given that it's flopping around, and it definitely shouldn't be doing that. You can see that it's popped completely out of the upper mounting brackets, and being that the radiator is plastic, they're very prone to breaking the mounting studs off the bottom of it. Let's say there's a good 50-50 shot, then once we pull these lower mounts off, we're gonna find that they're broken.
What?
Woo, okay. What I was mainly concerned about on this radiator are these little posts on the bottom that mounted in. That one, that's perfectly fine, as long as this side survived, which it did. We got ourselves a cool $1,000. Now, the only reason we're talking about $1,000 for something like this is because it's a lot more than just the radiator. You got the radiator assembly, you have the AC condenser / transmission cooler assembly, and then you have the heat exchanger on the front, along with the radiator fan on the back. The next piece on our whole front end deal here is our engine oil cooler, which is the one piece of cooling that is not contained to that big radiator assembly. Nailed it. Even in the lightest of wrecks, these things constantly get ripped off. It's probably the most commonly damaged thing on the front of these cars. And also, pro tip, if you buy a car from auction, if you buy a car that's wrecked or has any bit of damage around this area, make sure you check to make sure these lines aren't ripped off. Heard it all too often when somebody will buy one of these cars, just start it because they're excited to hear it, and they seize the engine up in like 15 seconds. Either way, for as easy as these things are to damage, ours survive perfectly fine. It's worth $600. Before we can move on to our last piece of cooling equipment, which is a super slick piece of Redeye and Demon specific tech, we got to make a little room because this is more than just a piece of random cooling equipment in the front grille. It's an entire system. And speaking of Demon and Redeye specific tech, we've got our air grabber intake here, which I believe the later Hellcats had it as well, but either way, it's where the hood has nostrils or a big vent in the case of the Demon, and the air will come down and get force fed into this air box. From the dealership, this whole intake setup, the air box, the hose, and this little emissions piece is $1,500. In our case, it's not going to be worth anything because I'm going to steal it for the Demon 170. You know, I've been holding off on buying one, being that they're $1,500. Now back to the cooling system. This guy right here is our intercooler water pump on the Hellcats. The supercharger cooling system and the engine cooling system are two separate systems. Therefore, each one of them needs their own water pump. This is our engine water pump, and this is our intercooler water pump. And on the regular Hellcats, you just have this pump. There's a little auxiliary cooler right here to go along with our main heat exchanger. But on the Redeyes and the Demons, they have this big monstrosity hanging off the side of them. This black box is known as an inner chiller, and while normally you just use heat exchangers and air to keep your blower temps in check, this uses refrigerant. It's shared with the car's AC system, and the end result is a much more efficient cooling system. Especially considering the cooling system issues these cars have from the factory, people are always trying to find something that they can do to get that intercooler temperature in check. So when you can find a complete kit like this, all the lines, the wiring, the solenoids, everything you need to install it into a regular plain Jane Hellcat, they're worth $1,500. But man, they really, truly are a monstrous system. Check that out. Remember how that oil pan shifted over on the transmission earlier and got bent? I think the whole drivetrain might have shifted over just temporarily because that AC line, it runs right down there between the engine and this strut tower, and you can, wow, see the one coil pack actually has a chunk taken out of it. It's nothing serious. It still functioned perfectly fine, but that is impressive. And I guess since this one has one dented AC line, we'll knock $100 off, call it $1,400. We got our engine bay well stripped down. Now it should be as simple. Pulling out our drive shaft, dropping the rear end, and then dropping our engine down. There we go. I didn't in any way, shape, or form expect that this drive shaft would have survived. We've had these get hit in the side like this way, way less hard, and the carrier bearing will be all torn out of it. Not only that, but the shaft itself will bend, and somehow this one looks perfectly intact. Then there's our last real bit of money out of this car, at least outside of what's connected to the engine. Our rear differential, and based on some of the crazy prices on other parts from this car, you'd probably think it's $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, but it's really not worth that much money. Even on their best day with low mileage like this one, they're worth about $1,000, sometimes even a little less. Especially these 262 ratio diffs out of the automatic, which are by far the most common. There's just a ton of them out there, and supply and demand dictates that even if these are big money from the dealer, they're still going to be relatively, at least, affordable used. Which, of course, is awesome news if you're racing these cars, because once again, big power, big weight equals a lot of broken rear diffs. But it is still one of those things that's really hard to reconcile. How is the diff only $1,000, but the drive shaft is $800? Ready to see if this has all been worth it?
I'm kind of nervous, I ain't gonna lie.
I'm not going to say I'm nervous, because it's all been going really well until now. But you never know. Until you pull an engine out of one of these deals and find a big crack in the block or something, you can never be too sure. We should be clear to come out. The only thing we do still have connected is our heater hoses. They're in a terrible area, so we're going to put it halfway up and then get those out. Normally, if this was just a car we're stripping for an engine, I'd just cut these, be done with it. But I happen to need these for the Demon 170. Oh yeah, now we're free. That was easily top 5 smoothest removals we've had. That was a nice one. Wow. So we saw that damage on this coil pack earlier. I thought it was just this. I thought it got gouged, being that the car was running fine. I didn't think that this would be the case. This thing is almost severed. Like the whole coil pack is broken. It's just flopping around. We're gonna have to replace that. We'll probably have to replace this one too. That one's cracked. For this damage, it is amazing that it was still running fine. I should note that buying wrecked cars like this is not out of the norm, and it should 100% be expected. You're always gonna have to fix some little damage, whether it be coil packs on the side like this, or even more commonly, you'll have tensioners in the front of the engine, pulleys, belts, all that stuff will be broken up and get the radiator pushed back into it. If you wanna do something like this, just budget in a couple $100 for miscellaneous random repairs. Said earlier that you can never call one of these deals a win until you get the engine out and look around it, because you never know what you're gonna find. But in this case, we ain't found shit. It truly looks like we've hit a home run here. The block, the heads, even the oil pan, everything's just ultra clean. It really does look like a 20,000 mile motor. And one thing, just in case you guys didn't know, Hellcat blocks, they're orange. Redeye and Demon blocks, they're red. So it is, of course, an original Redeye block, not that we had any doubts about that. There's that little bit of damage we saw on the transmission oil pan lip earlier. The motor mounts, don't trust those, so we just left those with the subframe and tossed them in the trash. But other than that, there's truly no damage to this thing, which, yes, it was what we were hoping for, but it's always nice when it turns out the way you expected it to. So we got ourselves a sick engine. Now the only question left is how sick of a deal was it? Like it never left. Now I think it's perfectly fair to say that we've came up with another $500 in just random stuff. Brackets, hardware, reservoirs, and then this hood itself, the thing we've been using as a chalkboard this entire time, it's got a little bit of a crease right there, but it's certainly, as best I can tell, still usable. It might have looked way off from the jump, but believe it or not, these hood hinges, that's what broke. They're swayed way over. So the hood itself, it's still in relatively decent shape, even if it'll need to be refinished paint-wise. These things are about $1,000 from Dodge. We'll call it exactly half price considering the damage it has. And let's see, by my rough count, definitely haven't put this in a calculator yet, just off the top of my head. Looks like $17,950, which means we just got this Hellcat Redeye full dropout, 20,000 miles with the transmission for just over $1,000. Now keep in mind, this is what these parts are worth, but say somebody across the country buys them, then you gotta ship them. There's a lot of money that ends up coming out of this. Fees on a platform like eBay, if you sell them there, there's of course the off chance that you sell somebody a part, it ends up not working right, then you gotta send them their money back. So getting engines this way, it is not without its risks, and it is by no means a quick and easy thing to do, especially if you're working in a home garage or a backyard, don't have access to something like a lift. But this time, along with many others, it's proven to be a great way to get a very expensive engine really cheap. Now, as for what we're gonna do with this engine we've procured ourselves, I don't know. I knew what I was gonna do with it if it was bad. I was gonna build it and put it in a certain other car. But now that we know we have this gem on our hands, we certainly can't tear this one down to build it and put it in a certain car. So I don't know, maybe we save this whole drivetrain exactly as it is to stick in something else, or I don't know, maybe we end up selling it and using that money to fund an engine to put into a certain car.
Yeah, it's not a Hellcat. Wait. You got a lighter next to the fuel tank? That's not super smart.
Oh, we didn't put it there. Oh, no cast left behind, you know?